Hi, are you a neurodivergent person who likes to cook, or wants to like to cook, or likes to cook but finds it frustrating sometimes, or maybe just needs to cook and wants cooking to be a more pleasant experience, especially when it comes to executive function in the kitchen? Well, then you've come to the right place. This is going to be a 4-part series where we're going to talk about neurodivergent cooking, including shopping, planning, doing the cooking itself. And I would love to have you stick around for the next 4 videos in this series. If you're new here, then hi, my name is Avery, and I help neurodivergent and nerdy humans to cultivate ease and self-trust for growing into our emerging future. And I used to be a food blogger, little known fact. I was a vegetarian food blogger when food blogging was real big in the mid-2000s. And I've always been somebody who has a special interest in collecting recipes and in cooking, but I've also had a lot of challenges with my executive function and how it affects what I'm able to do, especially as I'm getting older. And so I wanted to make this video with some thoughts that I have on approaches to this. I'm going to especially focus on executive function challenges like planning, strategizing, getting motivated to cook, being able to do things in the kitchen that might be unpleasant for maybe sensory reasons or just generally if we find it boring. And we'll also hit on specifically some sort of like systemic autism brain ways of doing things because I am autistic. And then where I can, I'll call out other connections I see with neurodivergence and different kinds of neurodivergencies, different neurotypes. But this is not necessarily specific to a diagnosis. So I happen to have ADHD, I'm autistic, I also have anxiety, so those things are what I live with in the kitchen. And I also have some fatigue and physical challenges, but you know, whatever it is that you're working with, I hope that this video will be helpful for you. I think especially if you do have any kind of executive function challenges, this might be right for you. I will not be covering hacks around like kitchen devices or like particular organizational tools, like, you know, ways to organize your cabinet or whatever. There are tons and tons of resources for that. This is going to be more about principles and approaches for cooking, and I will tell you about some tools, but they're going to be more about like digital organization and planning and organizing your recipes. So if that sounds good, let's jump in. Like I said, there's going to be 4 parts. There's really 3 steps that I want to cover, but this video is going to start from a kind of introductory place, and I want to talk about some of the needs you might want to consider and think about globally for this whole process. But then in the next few videos, we'll get into the 3 steps. One is deciding what to cook. One is getting your ingredients or doing the shopping. And then 3 is doing the cooking itself. We'll also cover a little bit in that 3rd video around food storage and around keeping track of how recipes went. And we'll talk a little bit in the first video where we talk about deciding what to cook. Part of that will also be thinking about kind of planning and meal planning if that's something you do. But let's start out with your needs. So I think a really good starting point for, you know, meeting your cooking challenges or getting into cooking, even if you've never cooked before, if this is new to you, and you know, you don't really know where to begin, is to start by thinking about what your personal needs are. And as we go through the next few videos, you can come back to these needs that you have in terms of what to prioritize and what matters. I'll try to make sure I timestamp all the videos so you can kind of jump around to specific sections. I tend to be kind of wordy. And so if there's a particular need you have, you can kind of find the section that would correlate to that. You're not gonna try to like solve everything possible at once, but think about what it is that you really personally need. So here are some questions that you might think about to kind of start thinking about your needs. First of all, I like to think about time and energy. So do you prefer in general to batch everything into one sort of grand day of cooking so that you have all of your food and you have plenty of freezer space or fridge space and you can do, you know, a week or even a month of meals at once and get it over with? Or are you more somebody who wants to avoid ever having to spend more than an hour or more than half an hour at a time in the kitchen? You know, do you need to like divided up. Some neurodivergent folks are going to have a lot of difficulty with task switching, so it's going to actually make sense to batch things. But for others, you may not have the spoons to be in the kitchen for very long. You know, are you somebody who wants to do a fair amount of planning in advance and enjoys like sitting at your computer and organizing things and does not really enjoy the physical experience of being in the kitchen? Or are you somebody who's like, I'm sorry, cooking is a sensory experience and there's no way that I want to be sitting at my computer thinking about food. I just want to do it. You know, where do you fall on that spectrum? You know, what do you dislike the most? Is it washing dishes? Is it the actual cooking itself? Is it shopping? You know, which of those things would you like to try to make the least painful? Do you tend to get bored with food and need a lot of variety in your diet? Or do you actually like eating the same things? Do you prefer to have a more limited palette of foods? You know, do you have a fairly adventurous palate and you're willing to try new things? Or do new recipes tend to be a little risky for you, you know, things you haven't tried before? What is it that stresses you out the most about the cooking process? Are you worried about, you know, getting overwhelmed, being able to plan out and sequence your steps? You know, afraid you might just kind of give up? Do you want to minimize the amount of time that you're spending for any of these stages? Do you particularly need to worry about budget? Do you have maybe limited physical spoons? Or do you just really hate doing advanced planning and the kind of mental work? You know, is it hard to predict your capacity in advance? For some of us, our energy levels vary a lot from day to day. If we have a neurotype that involves it's like trauma or emotional swings or dissociative identity disorder and have different alters from day to day. You know, we might not know who's going to show up or how we're going to show up on a particular day. Or are you somebody where you can kind of have a decent sense of, say, yes, I'm going to cook on Monday and that's not going to be a problem? Do you struggle with meeting your budget or with maybe throwing food out because you forgot that you bought something or forgot that you cooked something? Or do you struggle with tending to kind of eat out or grab snacks instead of cooking the food that you bought? What's your kind of style in the kitchen? Are you somebody who's a really creative cook who has an intuitive sense of flavors and food chemistry and just ideas for cooking kind of pop into your head? Or are you somebody who is more needing to have really detailed instructions and you prefer to have a recipe and maybe you even get nervous about changing things? Or you don't have a lot of experience and so you need to have, you know, very clear steps listed out because you're not really sure what to do if a recipe is leaving a gap. So those are some of the questions you might consider. You may have noticed as I was going through those questions, by the way, that I'm sort of thinking of this from an individual perspective. If you are somebody who's cooking for a family, cooking for roommates, cooking for a partner, etc., more than one person, then you're going to have to consider some of these questions, not just for yourself. Now, of course, you may find that there are some helpful things, right, to that. You know, do you have help in the kitchen? Do you have somebody who's going to be able to help you? And maybe some of the things you like the least, you can divide up. But also you may have, you know, picky kids, and so that's an issue. You may have issues around schedule and everybody's schedule and when food is where, you know, that you have to consider. So I'm one person who kind of cooks for myself, so that's really the lens that I'm thinking from. But hopefully you can extrapolate this out if you do cook for a group. Okay, so those are the needs that I would recommend you think about a little bit, and then we'll jump into the first stage of the process in the next video on deciding what to cook. I hope I'll see you there.